Boys, today we have another 2-in-1 review. You see here recently we reviewed Last Perdition, a very good 390 round per minute pulse rifle. But then there's another 390 that I would say is a very close cousin to it that many of you requested that I compare as well as single out in review, which is the Swift Ride XE8375. I'm not gonna get into the digits, boys. We're just gonna keep it as Swift Ride. Now I've got two good rolls here, one of which I just landed here recently on PC, and we will be reviewing this for both controller users and mouse and keyboard users. Timestamps are listed below, as well as a PVE review. First up, the roll on console. We have SLO21 post sight, which is a nice sight in terms of like that clean look, but a word of warning about these short zoom sights, especially one like this one. They seem to handle flinch poorly, at least visually they handle flinch poorly. So just keep that in mind. Moving on to the magazine perk, we have flared magwell. Not the best option here, but not a bad one. It does tack on some reload speed as well as some slight buffs there in stability. Now, the trait here, firmly planted. Now, firmly planted, we're going to talk about this trait a bunch. I've always said firmly planted was a very underrated perk, and it is so noticeable, especially for console users, when you actually take the time to crouch. Because the moment you crouch, you gain bonus accuracy, stability, and handling. Extremely beneficial for my players that like to slide coming out of corners, and you're already posted up crouching, and you're already taking advantage of firmly planted. Very disgusting though when you start stretching things out into that mid-range, into the levels of which this pulse rifle shouldn't be landing shots, but it keeps consistently landing it, and that is because of firmly planted here. Now the final trait here is Rampage. Not too shabby. Really good in terms of just chaining damage from enemy to enemy. I would have preferred to have a Rampage spec. Unfortunately, I didn't have a Rampage spec. The only other one I have is on my Breakneck. Instead though, I did use a Counterbalance mod, which takes us to the stats, boys. So a lot of people wanted to see a comparison more or less between this and Last Perdition. I will say that Last Perdition has better default stats than what Swift Ride has. About the only two things that Swift Ride beats Last Perdition in is recoil direction, and not by much, and aim assist. Now for my console users as well as my users that play with a controller, Swift Ride is a very good pulse rifle, but there is going to be one drawback to this pulse, and it was something that only happened ever so often, and it only happened whenever I was in gunfights with enemies that were actively shooting me back. Swift Ride for some reason has a tougher time at handling flinch than Last Perdition does. So I personally believe for console users or for controller users on PC, definitely go with the better rolled weapon. So if your Swift Ride obviously has a better roll than Last Perdition, you definitely want to go that route. But if both of these are neck and neck, I would probably take Last Perdition every day over Swift Ride, just because of that one thing, just the fact that it can't handle flinch as well as Last Perdition can. And again, I don't really know what ties into that because it's just so bizarre. Some weapons have the ability to flinch like hell. Some weapons have the ability to handle flinch phenomenally. Whether that's tied to his stats, I don't really know. I just know that visually, Last Perdition does a better job at handling flinch than Swift Ride does. And now, that's not to say that Swift Ride isn't really good. I'm just saying that that is the one little small drawback when comparing it to Last Perdition. Now, moving on to the rolls that I would look for, specifically for controller users, there is a lot of good things you can get on this pulse. Again, similar to something like Last Perdition, you have the ability to roll perks like Rangefinder with your heavy damage dealing perks like Kill Clip and Rampage, which I would highly suggest pairing those together. That would do really good for you. On the other side of things though, for my players that do take advantage of being crouched often, firmly planted guys, you just can't go wrong with it. Outside of that, a trait combination that I would probably look at, I don't really know how good it would be, is Zen Moment and Moving Target. Again, this is specifically for console users, as Zen Moment doesn't really feel like it does anything for mouse and keyboard. As far as magazine perks, I would prefer steady rounds just because there is a bit of hop in this weapon. It does have a little less default stability than something like Last Perdition, but even if you can't get steady rounds, you could go for a mag perk that buffs your stability. Again, tactical mag, or even something like flared magwell. Now moving on to the PC portion. Our PC roll, which is also what you saw a little bit there with our controller gameplay on PC, is pretty nasty. This was what we got here last night, and again guys, I got this while doing some Black Armory stuff. Just randomly dropped from one of the forges, but it comes with the SPO-26 front sight. Some people have said that this is their favorite short zoom scope. As a matter of fact, a lot of people state that if you were to go with a short zoom scope, SPO-26 is the one to go with. Me personally, I don't really care for it visually. That's my only drawback with it. It does a really good job at handling flinch. I also really like how small the red dot is. It really does a good job at catching those guys that are trying to head glitch you. The downside being it doesn't have as clean of a look as our other short zoom scopes. Now, it does add to your zoom. And out of all the short zoom sights, this is actually one of the two that actually adds to that zoom. So for my players out there that like to keep things sticky in that mid-range as well as hit registration and damage fall off, you may want to consider something that does add to that zoom. Now, our mag perk here is steady rounds. Very nasty, man. It throws our stability up so high. We're sitting at 75 stability here with this 390 round per minute pulse, which essentially turns this pulse rifle into a laser for mouse and keyboard users. Now, our trait is firmly planted, which I didn't really know if it was going to work out for mouse and keyboard users, considering that I thought accuracy was more or less tied to aim assist. But after talking with Drewski, it seems like it's more tied to bullet magnetism, which still affects mouse and keyboard users. So something like firmly planted most definitely affects even our mouse and keyboard users. And yeah, it was definitely putting in work for me. Now, our other trait that we combined it with is kill clip, which of course substantially buffs up our damage, essentially raising our crit damage from 31 per crit to 41 per crits and 20 per body to 26 per body, giving us a new time to kill at only 5 shots, whether it's like 5 crits or 4 crits in one body in 0.62 seconds. Needless to say, Swift Ride here was cooking, boys. It was very nasty. God, if they ever make a perk that extends the duration of kill clip, it's game over. Now, with that being said, is this the god roll for mouse and keyboard users? Well, it's really good, and it's really hard to beat this roll that I have here, guys. I really don't know what else I would want on this thing. Firmly Planted was doing a phenomenal job as far as keeping my reticle sticky, even with mouse. That bullet magnetism there in the mid-range was extremely nice. I think if I wanted to, I could perhaps swap it out for rangefinder, but I believe that's the only trait in that whole column that I would choose over Firmly Planted. And I don't even know if I would choose it over Firmly Planted. It'd be pretty much a close tie. Now, as far as the other traits, obviously Kill Clip is super potent. Rampage is not a bad one, especially if you're going to go into 6s constantly, which something like Rampage and Rangefinder together might even be the best route to go with. So I would actually do Rampage, Rangefinder together, and if I had Firmly Planted, Kill Clip would be my option, because the amount of damage buff that you get from Kill Clip is already going to be so substantial that it really doesn't matter if you have some damage fall off. Now, in terms of those magazine perks, in my Last Perdition review, I stated that accurized rounds would probably be a perfectly good option for mouse and keyboard users over something like steady rounds. I don't really know where I sit with that anymore, because after playing with steady rounds, despite recoil being much more manageable with mouse and keyboard, I still think I would want to go with steady rounds, just for the sheer amount of ease of use that you get from shot to shot. I mean, it was just so easy having that large amount of stability on this pulse rifle. Now, with that being said, guys, Swift Ride on PC, specifically this roll, was very nasty. And I think Swift Ride overall is a very nasty option against something like Last Perdition. The only downside, like I said, is that it seems to handle flinch a little funky. But the way I look at this weapon, Swift Ride is like Hawksaw, then Last Perdition is Ceros BDX. And it really just comes down to the roll. Like back in Destiny 1, neither one of those to me was better than the other. It just always came down to whichever role you had. And depending on what your role is, that would be the deciding factor for me. Now, for my PVE users, is this a good weapon to use in PVE? Well, it's in the energy slot, and it does do arc damage. So against arc shielded enemies, it's a really good option. But outside of that, we do have some roles here that I would look for on this pulse. Specifically, I would probably try to shoot for that Rampage Outlaw role with something like Extended Mag. And of course, you can pair that with the Rampage Spec Mod. I am curious though about an Ambitious Assassin role with something like Rampage. Of course, you wouldn't want to go with Extended Mag, as that would really drop your reload speed. You're not able to take advantage of Outlaw. So of course, something like Tactical Mag, Flared Mag, well, or even something like Drop Mag would be just fine here. Other than that, my only complaint here with this weapon in terms of PvE is I wish it had Feeding Frenzy. That's like the only thing I wish it would have had. Like Feeding Frenzy with either Kill Clip or Rampage would have been really nasty here to have in combination instead of Outlaw. To me, Outlaw is a little harder to proc with pulse rifles, which which is a huge reason why something like Blast Furnace, like the god roll for Blast Furnace and PvE is like Feeding Frenzy and Rampage with something like Extended Mag and a Rampage spec. Other than that though, guys, it won't do you wrong. And again, if you're a fan of 390 round per minute pulse rifles, similar to something like Last Perdition, it just deals arc damage instead of void. So guys, that is Swift Rod. I can't believe we haven't reviewed this weapon. I could have swore we did back in Black Armory. A lot of people were asking for a review on it since we reviewed Last Perdition. We're on like a pulse rifle kick, but starting tomorrow, guys, we're going to be hitting up all of the exotic catalysts as they roll out, and we will be trying to review them from both PC and console perspectives, get an idea of how all of these feel, especially weapons like Suro's Regime that's going to be getting a bump there in recoil direction, and Hardline with that stability buff. I want to see how they work in the hands of controller users as well as mouse and keyboard. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.